Hey guys, Mikoshi here. Today we'll be discussing how to make a Magic Find character in the 3.23 League. This video is going to be a guide on how to construct your Magic Find character in multiple different ways. In this league, in this video, I will be catering for players who do have the Headhunter belt, which is, I know for a few players that is, it could seem very high as a budget, but because of this league's mechanics specifically and how rippy those monsters are, going for Magic Find without a Headhunter might actually be more detrimental and less currency making than if you went for a normal character. So I will be making this video specifically for players who do have a Headhunter and a slightly higher budget. However, for those who do not have that budget, you are not left behind. I will be making a video for a lower end Magic Find hybrid, but that's just not for this video. I do suggest, however, that you still continue watching this video because I will be explaining how actual Magic Find characters work. I think it's a good idea to know what you're working towards and how Magic Find actually works so that once you start making your build, you have a better understanding of this genre. So for the video, it will be divided in two. The first part is going to be the showcase of the builds. There's going to be multiple builds in showcase with different budgets. You'll have all the POBs in the description down below. So I'll catch you later. Alright, so before we get into the actual items and the build, there is a few things you need to know about Magic Find. First of all, what is Magic Find for the players who don't know, or MF? It's a stat, basically, that you can add to your build, which will reward you with better loot and better quality of loot when you kill monsters. It's important to note that you need to be able to kill the monsters. If you do not kill the monsters, your MF stats do not apply. So they don't apply to your party members, they don't apply to mechanics, league mechanics, or chests, because you're not slaying the monsters themselves, as well as boss drops, for example, Exarch, Cirrus, Maven, stuff like that. Those drops aren't affected by your Magic Find. So in the Magic Find characters, there's two stats that we are searching for. Well, there's only two stats. It's item quantity and item rarity. Item quantity, also known as IIQ for increased item quantity, basically just gives you more items. You're going to have more items dropping when you're killing a monster. Item rarity, or IIR for increased item rarity, is basically a stat that gives you a better chance of getting a better rarity. So we know there's 4 rarities in Path of Exile. There's normal for white, magic for blue, rare for yellow, and then unique for orange. This will give you a higher chance of getting a better rarity, as well as if you do have a unique item that drops, there's actually tiers in unique items, right? There's trash uniques, which are often, I think it's going to be tier 5 or tier 4, I always forget, but on the lower end tier. And then tier 0 uniques are the best uniques that you want. Mage Blood, Calandra's Touch, Headhunter, stuff like that. So item rarity does increase the chances of getting uniques, and it does increase afterwards the chance of getting a higher tier of uniques. So it double dips in that area. Now, important to note, guys, divination card, currency, stuff like that are not affected by item rarity, okay? Divination cards and currency do not have a rarity, right? So your divine orbs are not going to transform into mirror orbs, mirrors of Calandra, if you have a lot of item rarity. However, if you have a lot of item quantity, you have more currency dropping. If you have more currency dropping, you have more chances of getting those said currency. So that's how it works. Now, there's something really important to note about item quantity, and that a lot of players do not understand. Item quantity has severe diminishing returns. What does that mean? That means the first time you start investing into item quantity, you're going to have massive benefits. However, the more you invest, your benefits are going to start to be worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Now let's take a look at that graphic and the table on the right side. The first 10% you invest into MF, so item quantity, sorry, you're actually going to receive 8.45% more items than before. So instead of getting one times your item, you'll get 1.08 times your item, which is good. That's an 8% increase. However, once you reach 100%, and you want to add another 10%, so you go from 100 to 110, you actually receive 1.99% more items. Basically, that extra 10% compared to the first 10% that you get is 4 times worse. As you can see on the bottom right of the screen with the graphic, the line kind of showcases how like stats for IIQ affect your actual item drops. The second thing to note with item quantity is a lot of players see 100% increased item quantity and they believe they're going to get 100% more items. It does not work that way. As you can see, at 100% increased quantity, you actually receive 56% more items. At 200%, you actually receive 77% more items. And at 300%, you receive 84% more items, right? So players that see 200% increased item quantity, they believe, oh my god, they're dropping 3 times more items than me. No, it doesn't work that way. They're only dropping they're only dropping 7% more items. So that's a small trap that players can get into. Just don't fall into that. Now, the biggest enemy of Magic Find is the people who think clear speed is better. And to be fair, clear speed is better because it's actually linear. If you clear your content 100% faster, so you do it twice as fast, you will be getting twice as many items, okay? It's a linear and it will not stop. You do it 3 times as fast, you'll get 3 times more items. That's just how it works. However, if you clear content 3 times faster, you burn through your maps, your sections, stuff like that a lot faster, right? So your return per investment is lower when you invest more into clear speed, stuff like that. So in this league, we're going to try and find a balance between MF and clear speed. Okay. Also, just to explain the chain of thought you need to have when making your character and when playing your character. It's do harder content, do the same content quicker, then do the same content quicker with Magic Find. That's how you make currency. And it's really like that. If your build cannot handle higher tier content, don't add MF and don't try to go faster. Try to clear that harder content. When that's done, do that same content quicker, okay? Get more movement speed, get more DPS, get more survivability, right? If you start dying every time you have to go back to your hideout, come back, hideout, come back, hideout, come back, that won't work. You're slowing down so much, it's not worth adding more MF. Once that is all set up, then you start adding MF one step at a time. You add an MF gear, you see, okay, my build works. I'm gonna add more. Oh, my build starts to feel like shit. I'm gonna take that off. I'm gonna go back to the item I had, and then I'm gonna invest maybe more into my bow, maybe more into my quiver, better tree. Okay, I'm gonna add this MF gear. It feels good, rinse and repeat. Okay, that's how you make MF characters. That's how players that get to 20, 30, 40 mirror builds do. Well, I mean, 40 mirrors in League, I haven't seen it yet, but when you go from a couple of divs up until the multiple mirrors, that is how you should think, okay? You should never think a different way. Now, what's MF stat should I aim for this league? In this league, do not go over 100% item quantity. It's a big no, especially how rippy those monsters are. They're going to completely murder you, especially if you go above 100%. Even high end, I'm talking like a few mirrors, I don't even suggest going to 100. It's hard to say an exact number. I think between 60% to 90%, it's what you want, okay? Now, what do I say that? Because at 60%, you get 40% more items, and at 90%, you get 53% more items. So basically, 13% more items between 60% and 90%. However, if you are at 60%, you can be maybe even twice as strong than if you were at 90% increased item quantity. And if we go back to the clearing, you'll be able to clear a lot faster and you will be getting a lot more items than the slight 13% increase. For the item rarity, there's not a lot of research on that. I think if you go in between 150 to 350, I mean, it's a big range, right? The item rarity will go up with MF gear. It's very simple to scale your item rarity, right? You have your Divination Distillate, you have your Golden Flask, you have your Ventur's Gamble, you have your Helmet, and boom, you're pretty much already in the 200s, right? So don't over invest into item rarity, but don't forget about it. Alright, so there are multiple ways of making a Magic Find character in, well, League, Standard, no matter what. The first one is going to be, do I go for the Sniper's Mark setup, which is the classic tornado shot, or do I go for the Warlord's Berserk, rage setup? Sniper's Mark is going to be a lot better for a single target, as well as when you have the Sniper's Mark on a chunkier enemy and you shoot him, there's going to be, your arrows are going to split on him and it's going to be very massive for clearing. However, that will only affect a single monster, and I think the cooldown recovery is 4 seconds, right? So it is very strong, it is classic, and it is the easiest way of using it, right? You only need the actual gem and then mark on hit, and it just works. The second way of constructing your MF is going to be Warlord's Mark, right? Warlord's Mark is basically it's a curse that when you stun the enemy that is cursed, it will grant you rage. With rage, you can use Berserk, which is the strongest buff in the game. Berserk gives you 20% more damage, 20% more damage with attacks, 20% more attack speed, 30% more movement speed, and 19% less damage taken. It is completely messed up, it is completely fucked up, it is completely broken. The DPS difference between Sniper's Mark and Berserk is slightly lower. Okay, so if you go for the Sniper's Mark, especially in the single target, you will feel a massive difference in DPS than if you went for Berserk. However, Berserk, that buff is for every single enemy. Sniper's Mark only works for a single enemy, so example, you hit the chunkier enemy, but the smaller enemies, well, they don't have Sniper's Mark. But Berserk, well, you have that DPS boost for everybody. The thing is, if you go for the Warlord's Mark setup, you need to make sure to not freeze, because if you freeze an enemy, because we're doing cold damage, if you freeze an enemy, you cannot stun him. And when you freeze an enemy, that means you crit him. And because our goal will be to have the highest crit chance, well, that won't work. So you're going to use something called Secrets of Suffering, which will, well, it won't let you ignite, chill, freeze, or shock, but you can then Scorch, Brittle, and Sap. That is very strong, by the way, Brittle, because it gives you a higher chance of critting. Even players that have multiple mirror setups, they don't even have 100% crit chance. But if you add Brittle, you're instantly crit capped. So Brittle is very strong. Berserk, you add Berserk, Secrets of Suffering, and the DPS is going to be similar to Sniper's Mark. The second way of making your MF, by the way, you can, every time I show a comparison, it's going to be you choose either or, right? You can go Sniper's Mark, Defiance of Destiny. You can go Warlord's Mark, Defiance of Destiny. You can go Sniper's Mark, Simplex, or Warlord's Mark, Simplex, right? It's not, you don't have to go one side, and one side. For Defiance of Destiny, what is that? Defiance of Destiny is an amulet, and the interesting stat with it is gain 25 to 35% of missing unreserved life before being hit by an enemy. This means, let's say you're at 50% HP and you get hit by an enemy and you have the gain 25%. Well, 50%, you do 25% of that, that's what? 12.5 HP. Well, he's going to hit you and you're going to recoup immediately 12.5 HP. And, well, it's a bit hard. You're gonna have to see like what the actual item is. I'm gonna put a small video on the screen showcasing how like completely broken it is. If you do not get one shot, small hits will not kill you. You can stand in those like middle, like those round circles that do elemental damage and just stand in them infinitely. Like there can be hundreds and hundreds of them and you're not gonna die because you gain that unreserved life immediately. And then if you pair that with Progenesis and Petrified Blood, small hits will never kill you. Now, the second way of going for MF, for your amulet, is going to be the Simplex or Great Wolf. That is the more classic magic find. They're going to give you a lot more MF stats, right? Up to 20% more quant and 56% more rarity, as well as a nice other stat, right? It could be life, it could be increased damage, projectile speed, stuff like that. So those are two ways of constructing your build. Then the last choice you're going to have to make is either do I go cold convert or do I go triple elemental? Now this one is going to really depend on if you know how to craft or not. If you don't know how to craft, I do suggest not going for cold convert because the investment is a lot higher. Prices this league are completely bonkers, and like the prices you see on trade, you can make every single item for pretty much half the budget. So if you don't know how to craft or you don't want to craft, I would suggest going into cold convert when you have a couple of hundreds to invest into your actual bow, right? I'd say at least like a lot of players say go into MF cold convert with at least a mirror bow. You could do that, and it could be suggested, or you can get into it with at least 800 physical damage. Okay, go between 780 to 800. I think that is the minimum you want to go for your bow. Or else you can stick to triple elemental, which is a lot more budget friendly and it is stronger on the low to early mid end. All right, so if you have a smaller budget, if you go cold convert, it's going to feel worse than if you go triple elemental. Okay, so don't rush to go to cold convert. There's no point. In this video, I will be talking about only the cold convert setup because this is for a slightly higher investment. So what do I think? On a smaller budget, I suggest going for Defiance of Destiny, which is a better play because you won't feel as squishy. And in the early game, well, early MF, right? So when you start, your DPS is going to be so bad, which means your defense is going to have to step up. Between Sniper's Mark and a Warlord setup, I think the Warlord setup is actually more fun, and it also makes you quicker, tankier, right? Because you're going to have a higher Berserk uptime, right? And you deal pretty much similar amounts of damage if you have Berserk on and if you have Brittle on enemies. However, it will be more complicated to work with your auras and your tree is going to have to change a bit. So your investment will be a bit higher if you go for the Warlord setup. I believe if I have a higher budget, I would go for a Warlord setup. But if not, and if you don't like to break your head or you're a bit scared of like playing too much, go for the Sniper's Mark. It's a lot easier, a lot more simple, and it works perfectly fine. Alright, so after all of that talking, let's actually get into the gear. For the bow, we're going to need a lot of damage. So we're going to go for physical bow because physical to cold conversion is a stronger tornado shot build because it gives out a lot more DPS. And it's going to be a classic bow, okay? If you can, go for the mirror tier bow. If not, a very simple between 700, at least 780 physical bow, all right? If you can't handle that budget, don't go for the physical to cold conversion on an MF. So what do you want? Highest physical DPS, highest number of arrows possible. You want a crit base, so it must be on a spine bow. You want attack speed, critical strike chance, accuracy, and no defensive mod, all right? On the screen right now, you have 3 examples of what your bow should look like. That's pretty much how you want your bows to look like. For your quiver, smack your quiver onto your character. If your DPS goes up, it's better quiver, okay? If you can, go for the +1 arrow, and then a stat that's really important is projectile speed, okay? Projectile speed is so GG for 2 reasons. First one is your DPS. There's a bow mastery in your tree that says increases and reductions to projectile speed also apply to damage with bow skills, or like damage with arrows or whatever. So example, if you have increased projectile speed, it also equals increased projectile damage. On top of that, something that a lot of players don't know is that tornado shot is like half of a timed skill, right? So it's a duration skill for the secondary projectile. What do I mean by that is you're gonna shoot your arrow, it's gonna do the tornado shot, and then you're gonna have secondary projectiles that are gonna shoot everywhere. Those secondary projectiles actually have a timer. So they're gonna exist for a certain time before disappearing. If your projectile speed is lower, for that same exact amount of time, they're gonna travel a smaller distance. And that might actually be the reason why your clearing sucks, right? So you see a lot of builds, they can pop legions, they're in the middle of the screen and the whole legion just dies. Yes, there's fork, yes, there's chain, but there's also projectile speed. If your projectile speed is huge and massively high, you might be able to reach the maximum projectile distance, which is 150 of those secondary projectile, right? So projectile speed is literally the second best modifier you can have on your quiver. That's why I would suggest, if you have the currency, to go for a feathered arrow quiver for that 30% increased projectile speed. And then if you can, go for life. Life is very important for MF and especially for defense. Go for crit chance, crit multi, physical damage, increased damage with increased elemental damage with attack speed, increased damage with bow skills, stuff like that. Just higher DPS, projectile speed, more arrows. For your gloves, we are going cold convert, so it is imperative that you have a 60% cold conversion gloves. All right, so your implicit is going to be physical converted to cold. Now I know some players actually have like 25% on their quiver or 40% on their Watcher's Eye, and they replace it with inflict cold exposure. That could work, however, that's going to be for more higher end builds. So for now, stick to the like, if you really don't know what you're doing, or if you kind of know what you're doing but not too much, stick to the classic. It always works, and the DPS is going to be nearly the same. Now if you go for the sniper setup, so the sniper's mark, go for the gain 1 rage on hit with attacks no more than once every blah blah seconds. That's going to be your way to generate a bit of rage, and then when you need a burst of damage, you pop berserk and you're going to burst through your rage, but you're going to burst through the enemy as well. Now if you go for the Warlord setup, you don't need your gloves to generate rage because you're going to be pretty much raging all the time, while berserking all the time. So I go for attack speed instead. For your explicit, if you have the budget, this mod is madly expensive this league, but the damage against shield enemies, if you don't have the budget, or if you think your budget is going to be tight because of that, just drop it. It is not worth it. I think like the bases sell for like 300 divines or some dumb number. So unless you go for high end, completely drop that, unnecessary, and it's a waste of currency. You want to go for suppression, very important, especially because we're using unique items here. Our suppression is going to take a hit, and we're going to have to really have suppression to get ourselves capped to not die instantly. If you don't have the damage against shield enemies, I suggest spell suppression, attack speed, chaos resistance, life, damage converted to cold, right? Which is, well, that's the most important mod, the physical damage converted to cold as an explicit, and then damage when you're leeching. Usually I suggest damage when you have flasks. However, if you're using the Petrified Blood setup, you're going to be, no matter what, when you're leeching, your leech won't stop once you hit 50%. So it's a better mod, so go for damage while leeching if you're using Petrified Blood. For the helmet, craft them, please, for the love of God. They sell for hundreds of divines for absolutely no reason. It is one of the easiest crafts of your life. Like, there's literally nothing hard about making those helmets. If you see on the bottom right of my screen, I have the crafting project. I checked I think those fetch for nearly half a mirror, or yeah, pretty much. I swear to God, it is the easiest thing. Just craft the base yourself, and you don't need the fractured increased rarity of items. Like, I know those are the ones that boost the price, but even then you can literally just fracture them yourself, and even if you fail like 10 times, it's probably going to cost less than the buying the actual base. Okay, so craft your goddamn helmet, check a video, and you're going to save yourself hundreds of divines. Or if you go on the low end, and if you don't really go for, you know, the perfect, you're still going to save at least half the crafting, like at least like half the price. The prices are way too high. Okay, so the small rant aside, for the implicit, you want mana reservation efficiency of skill. That's going to help, right? For if you don't have level 5 in lines, if you don't have level 4, it's just going to help for mana reservation, so you can stick more auras, more damage, and better quality of life. The second one is going to be reduced mana cost of attacks, right? We're not using Mage Blood. We don't have enough reductions for a Tornado Shot, and if our Tornado Shot costs us too much mana, well, you're going to have to wait for your mana regen, or you're going to have to invest more into Leech, gain on hit, stuff like that. You don't want to do that. Just get that. It's going to be the best quality of life, and it's just, you're not going to see it as an increase in DPS, but if you can shoot your Tornado Shot more often because you don't have mana issues, your DPS is going to go up, right? For your explicit, item rarity, you can have up to 50%. Now, there's a lot of players who are confused by that. They're like, how can some people have 40% rarity or 50% rarity if it says that a tier 1 is max 24? Well, it's basically because there's a prefix and a suffix that is item rarity. You can check on the bottom of the screen, there's a picture. You see the prefix, which is 24% increased rarity, and then the suffix is 26% rarity for a maximum total of 50%. So that's how you can, well, that's how you can go up to higher amounts, is by having those both modifiers. Second most important modifiers is going to be life. Okay, you want HP, you want that tankiness. If you can, craft or get the fractured item rarity dropped by slaying rare or unique enemies, and then you're probably going to need to have intelligence. Okay, add intelligence because, well, it's going to be an issue to get enough intelligence in the build for enlightened, power charge on crit, frostblink, stuff like that. We don't need to have strength on any of our gear because we're going to be using a lethal pride, which will give us 100 of strength. So you don't, all of that strength issue is completely fixed. We are a bow character, so we have a ton of dexterity, so that also is completely fixed. It's just our intelligence is going to be needed. So if you can, smack intelligence. If you don't need intelligence, I suggest replacing it with a how do you call that, a essence mod with maybe another one with increased mana reservation efficiency of skills. I was using that for a you know, a mid-tier MF character. Now, if you do have space for mods, you can go for physical damage taken as fire for that extra tankiness, but that is just when you're doing for the min-max. It's not necessary. For the rings, well, go for the Ventur's Gamble. There's no real better choice. Ventur's Gamble, you want at least a total of 130 or 120% elemental resistance in total. So maybe, what, 40 of each, right? 40 fire, 40 cold, 40 lightning, and then you want positive amount of quantity. If you can, go for the highest roll, maybe 10%. But if it makes the cost like triple or quadruple, don't go for it. You can go for a lower quantity, but just make sure it's in the positive. And if you can, go for the highest amount, because in this league, it's going to be hard to get a lot of quantity because of how strong those monsters are. Then try to get positive amounts of life, but that is going to be the last modifier that you want to invest. The second one is going to be, well, the third one, sorry, is the increased rarity. Okay, the implicit, you can roll it yourself and it costs nothing. You can go up to 15%. For the explicit, the one that is right below increased quantity of items found, try to go for at least 15 to 20%, okay? Go for at least that, maybe 20%, then try to go for a highest amount of life. Because if you go for a lot of resistance, a lot of quant, a lot of rarity, and then you want to go for a lot of life, those Ventur's Gamble are going to cost hundreds of divines, and that is slightly expensive. Now, if you do go for the expensive side, you can actually invest a lot in one of them, and then try to buy a Calandra's Touch, which is very, very cheap this league. I think it's sitting at 35 divines. I know for some it's a lot of currency, but compared to the old leagues, it is basically 3 times cheaper. So either invest into 2 medium Ventur's Gamble or invest into 1 high-end Ventur's Gamble and get a Calandra's Touch. For your amulet, craft it as well, okay? People sell those amulets for so many divines, and it is so easy to craft, it is literally brain dead. There are 3 amulets you can go for. The first one is going to be the Simplex amulet, which received a huge buff this league. The best perfect modifiers are going to be increase item quantity, increase rarity of items found, and then increase, well, a certain percentage to global critical strike multiplier. That is very good for MF stat, and it is a massive buff in DPS. Now, you could go for quantity. You can go for, I suggest if you use a Simplex amulet, well, actually, if you use a Simplex amulet, at least go for a item quantity. There's like no reason not to. Then go for, I suggest either multi, rarity, life, projectile speed. You can craft that. The increased projectile speed, increased projectile damage. Life also is very good for defenses, stuff like that. So you want at least, well, I have a bunch of examples on the screen. Just look at them and kind of choose. If you still want to go for the MF stat and you don't want to go for the Defiance of Destiny, but you don't have enough currency to go for the Simplex amulet, you can go for the Eyes of the Great Wolf, which is still a very viable and great option. You can go up to 20% quantity of items found, and then you can go for, I suggest, increased damage, or for another modifier that is very helpful for you. Finally, the third option for the amulet, which you cannot craft, is going to be Defiance of Destiny, which is very good for tankiness, small hits, and for lower ends. But even higher end builds, if you don't really care that much of going full MF, and you prefer being tanky and not dying as much, Defiance of Destiny, very great choice. For all 3 of them, I suggest to have Sovereignty anointed for mana issues. I think it's pretty much the only anoint you need because of how tight we're going to be for mana. There's no other anoint that would be better than Sovereignty. For the belt, Headhunter, best in slot, no questions asked. Gives you pretty much, once you're ramped up, you have unbelievable amounts of DPS, crazy amounts of movement speed, crazy amounts of defense. It's completely messed up. If you don't have enough currency for a Headhunter, I suggest actually not get into MF without it. Now, if you do want to, I will be making a video before, but like real talk, don't get into MF before getting a Headhunter. There's no point. For the boots, go for the Gold Worm. You want the highest amount of item quantity. Then the best implicit is going to be Spell Suppression. Usually our rare boots on a normal tornado shot have suppression, so that's why you want Spell Suppression as an implicit. You can go for 2 great implicit, like Spell Suppression and like Life Regen, which is always good. However, those can fetch for a stupid amount of currency. As well, if you have the same implicit or 2 very good implicits, but your item quantity is a bit lower. Example, you have the same implicits, but one boot is 2 divines and you're at 15% increased quantity, and the other one's at like 300 divines at 20% item quantity. Obviously, don't spend as much for a mere 5% unless you have the budget. Like, obviously, if you have the budget, yes. But if you don't have that budget, invest those 10, 30, 20, 40, 50, 100, 150 divs somewhere else, okay? For the body armor, there's actually 3 options, okay? The classic Magic Find version is going to be Greed's Embrace. Greed's Embrace, I suggest only high-end builds. If you do not have a high-end build, I'm telling you, please don't go Greed's Embrace. You will be so slow, and the that 50% increased quantity and maybe like 40% rarity is not worth it, okay? It's just gonna mess up your resistance. It's just gonna, it's just, if you have a lot of currency, go for it. Obviously, it's the best one. However, if you don't really have that much currency, don't go for Greed's Embrace. So what do you do if you don't have enough currency? You're on the low end, mid end, go for Harry's Ire. Both, by the way, both Greed's Embrace and Harry's Ire, you need the +1 level of socketed gems if you're running the snipers setup, because that will increase the level of your Enlighten, and that will make you be able to use all of your auras without having any issues. So get +1 level of gems, and then if you can, get +1 level of gems plus increased damage, but those can fetch for stupid amounts. So just stick to at least +1 level of gems. What do we do for Harry's Ire? Well, it gives you a shit ton of flat damage, and it gives you 30% chance to spell suppress. which is very good for your defense, and it gives you a massive amount of evasion, which is completely bonkers. You can go for it. Very OP, very strong, and very cheap. Now, if you go for a hybrid MF and DPS, you can go for the Rare Influence chest with crit, rarity support, additional curse, and other helpful mods. Do not go for it if you're going for the Warlord setup, because we're using Brittle, there's no point. However, if you're not going for the Sniper's Mark and you want to have a hybrid between the massive DPS and good enough MF, go for the Rare Influence chest. So first, let's talk about, well, what is Adrenaline? Adrenaline is a buff that grants you 100% increased damage, 25% increased attack, and movement speed. And it also gives you 10% physical damage reduction. So that's just completely bonkers, completely nuts, completely stupid. It's very, very, very strong. So how do we obtain Adrenaline? There's a charm mod that grants Adrenaline. It grants you Adrenaline for 4 seconds once you reach low life. And so our goal will be to reach low life, go above low life, and then go right back down so that we have Adrenaline all the time. Now, how the hell are we going to do that? Well, we're going to be using Petrified Blood. What does Petrified Blood do is your skills are going to cost mana and life until you reach 50% of your HP. 50% of your HP is when you're considered low life. Once you are at 50% HP, when you take damage, 40% of that damage is taken, is prevented, and then between 100 to 81% of that life is going to be lost for 4 seconds. So basically you take 40% less damage, but then you're going to take that damage as like kind of damage over time. So that will make it that, yes, you are less tanky to one-shots if you use Petrified Blood, like you are less tanky. However, smaller hits will not be as hard, like you won't die as much as smaller hits. So it really prevents you from dying from smaller hits. And your HP is going to kind of look like this image I have on the screen, right? So there's going to be kind of like a hand over your HP. That's when you know you have Petrified Blood. The thing is, with Petrified Blood, it actually stops you from recovering above 50%. So your life leech, your gain on hit, your life regen, all of that will stop at 50% exactly. So you cannot go above it. So that means you always stay low life. So then how do we go above 50% to go right back down? The only way to bypass the 50% blockage of Petrified Blood is by using either a life flask or a hybrid flask. So by using a flask to regen. We're using Divination Distillate, which is, well, a completely broken item because it gives you 50% elemental resistance, which is very good. And it also gives you quantity and rarity. So it's very strong with MF, and it grants you life regen. So it's just like every stat on that thing is completely strong. So what we're going to do is we're going to be sticking at 50% HP. We're going to be using Divination Distillate, which will make us go above 50%. And then the moment we are above 50%, Petrified Blood will make our skills cost life. And then we're going to shoot down right back to 50%. And we will reproc Adrenaline, okay? I will show an example on the screen, I think, if I can. So you guys have a better understanding of that. But it is, yeah, it's completely broken. Now the thing is, Divination Distillate recovers 500 life over 5 seconds. Our goal is that it doesn't recover as much, so don't quality your Divination Distillate, because if you quality it, that means you're going to recover more life per second, and if you recover more life per second, it's going to be harder to go above 50% and then back down. Now, if you have too much regen with Divination Distillate, what I like to use is I use Blood Rage, which is a buff that gives you increased attack speed and frenzy charges on kill, but you take, I think it's 4% of your HP per second. Now, if you use Divination Distillate and Blood Rage, you're literally going to regen maybe like 10 HP a second. So you're going to regen just a bit above 50%. You're going to shoot once. Petrified Blood is going to make you lose HP. You're going to get Adrenaline, and you have a huge amount of uptime on Adrenaline. Very strong in defenses and in offense. So that's how the combo works, and you should add it to every single build, MF build you have. For the general construction of your tree, it's going to be pretty much a classic tornado shot tree. Every single cluster is pretty much not going to change. There's just a few modifications if you play Sniper's Mark or Warlord setup. and everything is going to be explained in the POB, so it is very straightforward, so I'm not going to lose both our time on that one. However, I will be explaining a few items in the tree. First one being the Watcher's Eye. What are the best mods on Watcher's Eye? It's going to be crit while you're affected by hatred, penetration, cold penetration if you're affected by hatred, chaos resistance if you're affected by purity of elements. That is one of the best modifiers, right? Because we don't have a lot of chaos resistance. We have maybe on our gloves, but you know, our boots we don't, our chests we don't. We have Progenesis, but it's not enough to get us chaos cap, or at least in like the 30s, 40, 50%, right? Because as I said, monsters this league are completely nuts, so they deal a lot of damage, and if you get hit by somebody who deals chaos damage, well, your HP is just gonna drop. You can go for crit multi while affected by precision, attack speed while affected by precision, movement speed if you're affected by grace, unaffected by temporal chain if you're affected by haste. Those modifiers, in my opinion, are the best ones. Now, if you go for a crit hatred, penetration hatred, and then chaos resistance affected by purity of elements, those can fetch multiple mirrors, right? So you don't need 3 of the modifiers to be exactly in this list. Go for at least 1 or 2 maybe, and then the third one, or if there's no third, can be whatever, okay? So it's just depending on your budget. Search for all of them. I think the most important one is going to be chaos resistance affected by purity of element. Especially this league, you want to have your chaos resistance at least in the positive, okay? Go at least positive chaos resistance. For your charms, or for the that which was taken, which have the same modifiers, the best mods are so if you go for combos for like similar, like if they have all of those modifiers on that item, they're gonna fetch for a dumbass price. So if you don't have the budget, go for at least one and then another random modifier. If you have the budget, you want to have additional projectile on every single one of your charms or that which was taken, but that will literally make the price go up by hundreds of divines. So if you only have the budget. Now, the most important one is going to be gain adrenaline for 4 seconds once on low life. That is one of the main reasons why we also use Petrified Blood, is because of that. Culling Strike, very good. What is Culling Strike? It's your attack is going to immediately kill any enemy that is 10% HP or lower, no matter the damage, okay? So you can deal 1 damage. If he's at 10% HP, he dies immediately. Spell Suppression, if you're not capped. If you're using Hyrie's Ire, you're not going to really need. If you do not have Hyrie's Ire, then Spell Suppression. You could also go, if you have Hyrie's Ire, or if you have any intelligence issues, you can also go for plus int plus strength. Those are also good to get yourself your int cap, well, your int requirement. You can go for phasing on kill, which is very good because that permits you to walk through enemies, so you're not blocked into like hordes of enemies that are completely destroying you. So that is very good for quality of life and defense. Projectile damage, gain damage per distance. What else? There's Mirage Archer duration, which is very strong. Well, I mean, Mirage Archer duration, not really, because you're shooting all the time. Another one that is very low-key is plus chaos resistance per endurance charge. If you're using the Warlord setup, so only if you're using the Warlord setup, you're gaining endurance charge whenever you kill those marked enemies, and you can have up to 3 of them, and the maximum is 5. I think it's 5 chaos resistance per endurance charge, so that's basically plus 15 chaos resistance for free. Pair that with your Watcher's Eye, your Progenesis, and then this combo, and you basically have chaos resistance capped. So very low-key, but very strong nonetheless. Alright, so now you are at the step of actually making your build, okay? So you have no items yet. You're going to make your build. What to invest first? Get a Headhunter, okay? Buy the Headhunter and then check your budget, okay? It's the first item you should buy. Once you have the Headhunter acquired, 30 to 45%, I suggest the 40%, but between 30 to 45%, depending on your budget, obviously, is going to have to go to your bow, okay? Invest in your bow. Don't cheap out on your bow. For the love of God, it's a bow build. Invest in a bow. DPS is so important in this league, and the best defense is damage, okay? Then, once you have your bow, well, you're going to need 60% conversion gloves. You don't need to invest a lot in those gloves, but just make sure they have 60% and they have a few good modifiers. Spell suppression, maybe chaos resistance, attack speed, life, something like that. Very easy to craft. I made a video. You can make those for half the price of what they are on trade. So just don't cheap them out, okay? And just make them good, okay? But don't invest too much. Then you're going to want a good projectile speed quiver and a good DPS, right? So then again, I'm talking when you're making your MF, make sure to first have good weapons, okay? Then go for good venters with positive stats, right? Positive life, positive MF stats, and then good enough resistance. Invest in your clusters, okay? When I mean clusters, I mean specifically clusters. Don't invest into a stupid, crazy Lethal Pride or a Thread of Hope. That's not a cluster, okay? Then invest in the rest of your flask if you have the currency, Divination Distillate, Progenesis, stuff like that. And then invest the rest into your charms. That's the last spot. Charms can cost, I mean, I made some nice, like the list I gave you, if you don't have the +1 arrows, you can buy all of your charms for maybe less than 5 divs, okay? So those are going to be the last thing you're going to invest into. Now, once you have your actual build, okay, you have your build and you're wondering, what do I invest into? Get a better bow. Get more arrows, get more elemental, not elemental DPS, sorry, physical DPS. I think once your build is able to clear the content, save all of your currency until you get a mirror tier bow. Legit, that's what I would do, and that's what I would do. It's just I went into MF with like multiple mirrors, but if I was grinding by mapping and stuff like that, I just make a build that can work. If I can clear the content, I save all of my currency until I get a mirror bow, okay? If you don't have the currency, if you didn't have the currency when making your MF, get Progenesis, okay? So now I'm not telling you get a mirror bow before getting Progenesis. I'm just saying invest in your bow, then get Progenesis, then get higher levels of Enlighten, okay? If you have it in Enlighten 3, go for Enlighten 4. If you had it in Enlighten 4, try maybe Enlighten 5, okay? Finish your tree. Now, Enlighten 5 would be like the last, like one of the last things you invest, but going from 3 to 4 will help you greatly. Now, finish up your tree. What do I mean that? I mean, get all your clusters, get your Thread of Hold, get a nice Lethal Pride, okay? Don't invest into a nice Lethal Pride before you get a Thread of Hope, okay? Because Thread of Hope is one of the reasons why Lethal Pride is so strong, is because of those 5% double damage, right? But there's like usually 3 or 4 of them that are thanks to the Thread of Hope. So invest before on your Thread of Hope before investing into a nice Lethal Pride. Get a GG Simplex, GG Charms, okay? Those are gonna be one of the last steps you're gonna go for, because they're gonna fetch for multiple hundreds. So invest into a nice Simplex and Charms, and then finally go invest into very nice corruptions on your MF gear, right? I'm talking crazy corruptions on your Greed's Embrace, crazy corruptions on your Ventors, maybe crazy corruptions on your boots, stuff like that. Just like those are gonna be the last thing you're gonna fetch. Maybe you go for that 5% increase item quantity on that Headhunter if you have the balls to buy it. I would actually just double corrupt it myself until I hit it, because it probably costs less. But if you don't have the balls, just buy for that. But that's gonna be the last thing you're gonna be investing into. So that kind of finishes up what I wanted to talk about. This was, the MF guide. I will be making small videos shortly on like very specific builds. So like on the, a few hundreds, maybe a one mirror build, then, multiple mirrors, and then maybe the low end MF, right? So those videos are going to be like 10 to 15 minute videos of their own, where I'm going to go over the build and explain everything you need to know. But this video should explain everything you need to actually know about every single type of build, and there will be POBs in the description. So hopefully you have a lot of fun this league doing MF, and I hope multiple mirrors drop for you guys. And yeah, so that's the end for me, and have fun.